Well, I think what we should probably do is get started here. I'm just going to share my screen so that we can, have some visual here. But first of all, let me just kick this off with a few introductory remarks, and then I'll provide an opportunity for the folks on the call here to introduce themselves. I think it goes without saying that we are at a really, I don't even know if the right adjective to describe this moment for the voluntary carbon markets is, but really carbon markets as a whole seems to have been waiting for this moment for a very long time. And here we are at a critical juncture where we are in need for a significant ramp up of information, of data, to inform a growing number of organizations that are continuing to make new pledges around net zero or carbon neutrality on the corporate demand side, but also as we are, very fundamentally, seeing a challenge, in the climate change space where, despite efforts, deforestation rates are climbing. Despite efforts, we don't have the technologies, together today to solve the problems and to drive emission reductions down, but we're working on it. And increasingly, it just seems very powerful that the voluntary market can really serve as a helpful catalyst, as it has over the past, couple of decades plus, to bring finance into, these types of new investment opportunities that are driving reductions and removals of greenhouse gas emissions. And so with that being said, Forest Trends developed Ecosystem Marketplace about 15 years ago to track this market. I'm sure many of you that are on this call now are familiar with us. For those of you that are not, we're based in Washington, D.C. We have a number of different initiatives that tackle different environmental issues and social issues that are connected to those environmental issues. But our platform, Ecosystem Marketplace, is really built to engage the market, to gather primary confidential from hundreds of organizations around the world, to be as comprehensive as possible in this approach. And so as I mentioned, the market and its movement towards a need for more regular information, more robust information, we have made investment 6 months to upgrade a number of our tools and systems to be able to offer prices and volumes details about transactions, deliveries, and insetting and other types of activities that happen in the voluntary market in a way that can really help to inform this new wave of market activity, as well as to continue to support those actors that have been involved in the market for a number of years. So with us on the call here today, and I'll for the speakers to briefly introduce themselves, are my colleagues Patrick McGuire and Kim Myers. Patrick, Kim, would you just like to say a couple of words, and then I'll introduce Katerina and Kelly.
Yep, thanks, Stephen. My name is Patrick McGuire. I'm the Senior Program Manager at Ecosystem Marketplace and Supply Chain. Good to be with you all today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Myers. I'm the Senior Associate Ecosystem Marketplace. Also great to be here.
Thank you. And Katerina is with Vertis Environmental Finance, one of our strategic supporters. Over to you, Katerina.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. So I'm glad to be here. My name is Katerina. I work with Vertis Environmental Finance as a carbon trader, and as I said, happy to be here.
And over to our good old friend and supporter, Kelly Hamrick.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Hamrick. I'm a policy advisor with the Nature Conservancy, but if my name looks familiar, I also used to work at Ecosystem Marketplace. So very excited for the new announcements made today and to be a part of this presentation.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, it's great to have you with us here today, and same to you, Katerina. So today is really, I think, a really exciting, day for us. We've been really working hard to build these new tools and systems, and also to continue to create new reports and analysis that can help inform the market. So we have sort of a three-part agenda, and we definitely want questions to come through. I think we have some media here, as well as kind of market experts, and so as well as those that are new. And we want to make sure that we're not talking over anybody, and also we're talking with people in this conversation. So feel free to send in some Q&A if you have any questions. We don't have any polls or other things, so we do want to make sure that we can capture your input and feedback as we go. Obviously, before really diving in, thank you to Carr for setting up this session with us. Really happy to be able to present a new report that is really the final installment of the 2020 State of the Voluntary Carbon Markets report. We will be fully publishing this report later this week. So soon after this webinar, we'll have a sign-up page on the website, and we'll make sure you're notified. But if you're part of our mailing list, you'll get a copy of that at the end of the week. But that really is focusing on European and North American buyers, and some of the kind of the details as we dive into those additional attributes around project location and others to really unearth kind of what's going on from a more regional perspective. We'll have some time for Q&A, and then we'll go into a speakers roundtable where our colleagues here will jump in, and from their perspectives, talk about this moment in time and how we can collectively, work together to get the information we need to really evaluate, the price of carbon, the price of those additional attributes, and how that factors into a carbon offset price, and many other details. And then Kim, who just presented herself in a moment ago, she's been really driving the development of this brand new online survey platform for the EM Global Carbon Survey. And so she'll take a few moments at the end of this session to show what this now looks like. And we're already getting some great feedback that it's very very functional. It's a lot easier than what we've had in the past, and we'll highlight some of the key changes that we've made from last year to this year and going forward, as well during that session. And then we'll close this out with some Q&A and some general discussion. So I'm keeping my eye on the time. We are just about 10 minutes in, so I will jump right into this overview of the buyer's report. And as many folks may know us from over the years, we've produced a number of reports in the past that have tracked the buy side of the market. The survey itself is going to project developers and intermediaries, brokers, and investors to gather information from them about that part of the market and who they are selling to. And so that is what this report is. As you might know from our previous installment, we had a number of respondents that responded to us last year. We had over 150 provided responses to the survey. Of those, 110 organizations provided at least one detail on a critical buyer indicator, such as the country and region of those buyers, the type and sector of those organizations, the function that they have. Are they an end user, an intermediary, as well as more details such as around the greenhouse gas emission scope that those offsets were used for. So we went into some of the detail on some of these items here in this report, and that's what I'll be able to show you a sample of today. I won't be able to get into all the details in the interest of time, but we have there's a note here about what we've done for the 2021 survey to update the indicators around buyers. And it's really to try to get more honed in on the use of these offsets. Are they being used for specific net zero or carbon neutrality commitments? And as we further refine this with feedback from the market to really understand what we should be trying to unearth and try to ask for through the survey, it might also get into details such as, is there a certain time horizon where these offsets are being used? How how are those offsets being contextualized, amongst other emission reduction activities that the company may have. And some of these questions, the sellers of offsets just won't know. And so we are supplementing that with other research that we're doing about these organizations. So I just thought I'd start off briefly here by laying that context. So of those roughly 110 organizations that provided at least one of the main indicators around buyers, we really focused in on using the region as the starting point. And so there's a diversity in the types of organizations that respond, from very small to very large. But what we found was, of those that provided a region in the buyer's details, that Europe really came out on top. 63% of voluntary offset buyers were from Europe. And then North America came in second, and then other geographies such as Oceania, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean were bundled together as part of that rest of the world. And we're already hearing some indications that the rest of the world is picking up, and there's a larger demand side emerging, or has emerged already. And so we'll be really interested to see how this number might evolve over the next survey cycle, which is kicking off today. Then I thought it would be good to show a couple of highlights from the report that start to dive into the demographics of these buyers. For both North America and Europe, private sector was really the leader. This makes sense to us, as we know that for the most part corporations are the ones that are offsetting. There is in that other category you see on both of the right sides of these charts, included in there are governments, nonprofits, individuals, as well as academia. So there's a mix, a bag of types of buyers in that other category. But focusing purely on the for-profit side, we can see the diversity in the prices that these different types of sectors are paying, and as well as the volumes that they're purchasing. And for interestingly, finance and insurance in both North America and Europe were of the higher sectors that were purchasing credits. Although for Europe, it was energy. The energy sector definitely came out on top. And a lot, I think we kind of looked at this and draw it up to a little bit of maybe more that there's a historical relationship that some of these sectors might have in Europe with emission reduction trading or different reduction schemes. And so the diversity of sectors that you see there is sort of showing maybe more awareness or appetite across the board. And again, this is in 2019, so we'll see how this evolves as new data comes in. And then this is actually looking at European project countries as well as North American project categories. So kind of two different things. But what we wanted to understand was the buyer regions, how much of that is linked to the a supply of credits, as well as like a local supply versus an international supply, as well as certain preferences based on project type. And so because we are familiar with the fact that in Europe there just isn't that much of a local supplier, there hasn't traditionally been as much of a local supply, but new standards that are coming in, such as UK woodlands, are seeing incredible growth and opportunity for developing homegrown offsets for domestic buyers. That this may start to shift, but just looking at the project countries for European buyers, you see a very strong mix here. If you peel back some of the layers for India and China, for example, that you'll start to see that the majority of that is renewable energy credits, and so that's why the price per ton, the average price per ton in India is just under $1, versus if you look at Indonesia or even Peru and Brazil and Guatemala. These are countries that are producing more forestry and land use projects, and so are sort of garnering higher prices per ton. And so this, I think, really shows kind of a difference in diversity in the U.S., which is not a visual I put up on the screen here today. The majority of offsets are coming in from North America. Sorry, for North American buyers, the majority of credits are coming in from North America. But just going to the other side of the screen, to the blue chart, and we have these charts for both European and North American buyers in the report that will come out. But just to show that there's also an interesting dynamic between what is available in a domestic landscape. And so because in the United States and in North America, there is such a diverse mix of available domestic offsets, from landfill methane, for example, which would be encompassed in waste disposal, as well as forestry and land use, which, sustainable forest management, afforestation, reforestation, as well as appeal for, more chemical process type of projects and renewable energy projects. That there's a diversity, but it's not as diverse as you see, from Europe. And but what is also sort of unique in the United States is that a lot of these credits are coming from, from North American supply.
Stephen, really quickly, there's a request from some of the comments about, could you put it in presentation mode so they can better see the images?
I can zoom in here. So I can't put it into presentation mode, unfortunately, due to a technical issue, but hopefully that helps. And there's only this is the last slide here. And so we also broke this down into, standards and vintages. So the last slide, though, I have here is a breakdown for North American buyers by standard. And this is consistent, that what you're seeing here with VCS and VCS plus CCB, this is really indicative of sort of the market totals, where we have the majority of supply is from VCS and VCS CCB. Sense that on when you go down to a regional level, that would also be the kind of where the balance of demand is. But interestingly, and why I wanted to bring up this screen for North America is really to show that there are kind of more domestic standards that are offering a supply of credits, such as American Carbon Registry, CAR, which they're not maybe exclusively domestic projects, but the majority of that supply is and has historically been. In Europe, you will see a larger interest around gold standard than you see in North America. And also you'll find Plan V, larger share of demand in Europe as well. So I know this is fairly high level, but it provides an opportunity to look at the market from a different angle, which is around who are buying these credits, and hoping that this will, we want to, as much detail as possible when they're reporting to us, because if every organization provided, the full level of granularity around their transactions and who their buyers were, then this continued to be informative here. We did some final comment I'll have here is we did some kind of review of what was likely to provide us with the buyer information, and in which cases was it more challenging, or did it just not appear? And so I don't know if challenging is the right word, but more it just wasn't provided. And we found that it was tended to be organizations that were responding, control over offsets if they were an intermediary, were less likely to provide, the full, scope of buyer details. Product developers, tended to have a pretty good sense of that, and even if it was not the end buyer. So I think there may be something to the dynamics here of the type of organization that's responding versus whether or not there's willingness to respond. But we definitely want to just continue to encourage organizations to provide these details, and we'll continue to make more efforts to put those data points to. So I will. I'll stop there. I wanted to hand it over to Vertis and Katerina, because they provided some kind of support to develop this report, and we really are engaging with our strategic supporters in a deeper way than ever before. As this market is moving very quickly, and Katerina, with her experience in the European market, I thought I'd open it up to you now, just to jump in here and say a few words and offer any guidance and wisdom before we go into Q&A.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So yeah, we are super happy to participate on this report with Ecosystem Marketplace. We have been supporting Ecosystem Marketplace for some time now, and we very much recognize the work that it is doing for the voluntary carbon market, especially because we are a company that comes from the compliance carbon trading background, so we understand very well what is the real value of transparency on the carbon markets, what are the benefits, and why is it so important for the proper functioning of the market. So this is why we support Ecosystem Marketplace. This is why we agreed to support on creating this report. Yeah, so just a couple of points from my side on the data from the report. I guess everyone will review once it's published, but in general, from our point of view, since we are a company that mostly works with European clients who offset here in Europe or their operations globally, we are very much proud that actually Europe shows leadership on the voluntary carbon demand. So that's definitely a positive thing that came out of the report. We were also surprised with the very large percentage of buyers coming from financial sector. We also think that this trend is going to continue. There might be positives of financial sector being heavily involved, and also negatives what we see in the past, that there has been a lot of demand from the financial sector, and it apparently already started in 2019. It might be creating an extra pressure on the prices currently if there is more demand from let's say companies that like to buy and hold the credits for investment purposes. We have been looking at the data with the Ecosystem Marketplace, and what I think in our perspective was very interesting was the difference between prices that buyers paid in B2B sectors as compared to B2C sectors. So there has been a lot of difference in the average prices paid. Perhaps you could also explain it as companies with very high emission intensity as compared to their profit levels would be usually paying less or demanding credits that were cheaper, not necessarily paying less for the same type of credits, but simply their portfolios would be built from credits that were traded on lower prices. What was kind of obvious or expected was the interest in nature-based projects. And what we've seen when we look deeper into what kind of nature-based projects were trendy or the most traded in 2019, it was obvious that the majority would be focusing on forest protection methodologies, and lower share would be demanded from carbon removals as in afforestation, reforestation methodologies. And personally, that would be my hope, that simply the financing would not be, let's say, redirecting from forest protection activities, but simply with the recent interest, very high interest in carbon removals, that we would see more and more demand overall for nature-based projects as compared to, if the demand would be just shifting from one to another. In general, there are many interesting outcomes of this analysis, so I encourage everyone to download the report once it's published later this week. And and I very much thank to Ecosystem Marketplace for having us together on this. Over to you, Stephen.
Sorry, yeah. Thank you, Katharina. Yeah, there's a whole lot more to unpack, and I just thought I'd add on a quick comment, because you mentioned, preference of forestry and land use, and that was, the slide that I showed that had the breakdown of project type by buyer region. It showed a diversity of interest from North American buyers, and I think we're kind of leaning towards understanding that to be a diversity because there's more availability of homegrown supply. But in Europe, we definitely saw a higher portion, a much more significant portion going to removals, or what would be, as you said, forestry and land use projects. And we'll see how that continues to evolve. But, as I mentioned before, with the standards such as UK woodlands, which is very much a nature-based solutions type of standard, and others that might emerge, to offer that supply, how that might potentially begin to shift. I think, I don't know if any of the other folks on the line want to jump in here, but it kind of leads us into the next section, which is, really, I guess, getting to a kind of an underlying question of, how do you price carbon? And we have, I would like to maybe turn to, Patrick, to just give a few minutes of kind of what we've been, doing to try to understand this and what our approach is looking like. And then we can turn it over to Kelly, who can jump in with TNC's perspective, and then back over to you, Katharina. But please do, continue to send in questions. I'll take a look at those now and start to tee those up. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. When we set up this portion of the panel discussion, we kind of framed it as what does a carbon offset cost? But I've taken it in a little bit of a different direction and expanded it maybe a bit. And first, my comments will focus on maybe how much should a carbon offset cost. And this has a lot to do with supply and demand dynamics. On one hand, you could say it costs exactly what the market will bear in its price. On the other hand, clearly the prices have remained low over the years, and if we are going to start addressing the supply that's going to be needed to address this booming demand, then things are going to need to shift. Stephen talked about the booming carbon markets, and particularly expectations around them at the beginning of the call. Over the past year or two, there's been more than 1,500 companies that have now set net zero expectations. The Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets have estimated that carbon markets could grow as much as 15-fold by 2030 in order to satisfy that demand, and even much larger growth by 2050. There's estimates as high as 100-fold. The German bank Berenberg has estimated that overall global market for carbon offsets could increase to as much as 200 billion by 2050. That's across voluntary and compliance markets. So if sufficient supply is going to materialize to satisfy that demand, then there's going to need to be a strong price signal that's going to drive that supply and drive liquidity. I think that is also consistent with just the laws of supply and demand. And the current prices that we've been reporting on the past few years, which global averages remain in that $3 to $4 per ton range in the voluntary market, are going to need to increase in order to drive that supply that's required. One way you could look at this is the high-level commission on carbon prices. They've estimated that a global carbon price of $50 to $100 is going to be needed by 2030 in order for us to achieve the Paris Agreement targets. I think they've also said that those prices should be between $40 to $80 a ton by 2020 in order for us to keep on track with Paris Agreement. And obviously, that has not been met certainly in the voluntary space and in most compliance markets. I know Kelly will touch on a global study that TNC has led regarding the potential of natural climate solutions in particular to address supply issues. And I believe that study also used a price of up to $100 a ton in order to estimate what the supply potential could be. So this is all to say that, what should the carbon price be? It should, I think the bottom line is it should be higher than what it is right now in order to satisfy this, what appears to be a tsunami of demand that's coming online. We're certainly not in the prediction business within EM. We're more about reflecting the data that we're seeing. But I think it's important to note that we want higher prices, right? To a certain extent, offsets are not the main event here. What we want are companies to be decarbonizing first and foremost, and a higher carbon offset price is going to incentivize companies to do that. And then just in terms of how much does a carbon offset cost? It's a great question. It's sort of akin to how long is a piece of string? The answer is it depends, and it depends largely on the mixture of attributes associated with a particular project, and those are things like the project type. Is it forestry? Is it renewables? Is it methane capture? And associated co-benefits with those different types of projects. The project locations, vintage, standard. So these are all the additional attributes that Ecosystem Marketplace collects in its once annual survey, now migrating to a sort of a live constant survey. And we're going to talk about a little bit more about that as we get further into this presentation. But the purpose of our work is to gather and to share this data, to drive greater transparency in these markets, but in a way that also maintains respondent and project anonymity. So we roll up the data. We have to have enough data points in order to roll up the prices that we're sharing so that they're average weighted prices. As I mentioned, this model is changing. We've done this for 15 years, and there's been an annual report. Last year, we moved into an approach where we're doing installments in the report. This buyer's report is the latest installment, but we'll talk a little bit more about how we are collecting the data more frequently, and we're going to be creating a new online data dashboard that gets the data out to the market more frequently as well. So I guess I'd also add that an important part of this is giving proper recognition to projects in the over-the-counter market that provide greater co-benefits beyond carbon and typically obtain higher prices because of that. So, when you talk about the different project types, renewable energy credits we see at a much lower price than forestry projects, and afforestation, reforestation projects have a higher price than emission reduction, such as RED projects. We've seen over the past year, the 2019 data set, renewable energy prices as low as the global average, I think, was $1.40. And those prices are even lower on exchange traded platforms. The task force certainly recognizes a role for a healthy over-the-counter market, but I think it's fair to say that they've also emphasized the importance of exchange traded platforms to scale up the volume. I think we see the need for both of them in terms of the volume and driving quality through the OTC. So that's part of both of these problems that we're trying to solve here in collecting this data and sharing it out more broadly. Because many buyers are willing to pay more than, let's call it the minimum for what might be on an exchange traded platform. They're willing to, a lot of the recent calls that have gone out specifically around natural climate solution credits are paying higher than what we're seeing in the average in marketplace.
Patrick, I'm just wanting to turn it over to the speakers here. We're just in the interest of time. So maybe Kelly, I could grab you and have you jump in. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. And definitely give me a time heads up if I go over.
Will do.
So I think everything Patrick said makes total sense. And I wanted to just start by kind of taking a step back and talking about what's the point of an offset. So the idea is that, an offset is a more cost-effective short-term solution for companies that can't afford some of the harder to abate emissions reductions. And so when I started in this space, about a decade ago, if you ask me kind of when do we need to have less offsets, you might say even by 2030, right? Like at that point, we should have already hit all of the low-hanging fruit, and the world needs to actually kind of be moving on towards really deep internal decarbonization. Of course, reality is different. And where we are now is at a point when the world is actually finally starting to take climate change more seriously. So instead, we're seeing this really explosive growth around offsets, which we think is going to go at least through 2030, potentially even further. And so, one key thing that is really important to consider with offsets, especially voluntary offsets, is that we need to see that this price increases over time, because we need to start seeing that shift towards internal decarbonization being more cost effective, right? And so, when does this happen? I don't have a crystal ball that says the answers, but I think one important thing is to consider that we have to see results, right? So we've seen recently, for example, with the natural climate solution space, a lot of companies are really interested in removals from forestry, which is fine, but we need to first see a reduction or hopefully complete elimination of tropical deforestation before we sort of move on from reducing or avoiding emissions in the first place. So where are we today? Demand is growing. It's already grown tenfold in the last decade. And as Patrick was saying, with the Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets, they're forecasting a 15-fold increase by 2030. What that actually means is that demand might reach about 1.5 to 2 gigatons by 2030. And so, what's the role that TNC has here, and why are we so interested in trying to grow this? So we did some data analysis in 2017 that was estimating that natural climate solutions could help reduce or sequester about 11 gigatons per year using NCS by 2030. But I think this is always the interesting part, as Patrick noted, that was a scientific article, right? And so the scientists used what they thought was a fair carbon price, which was $100 per ton, which is clearly, nowhere, we're not at that point in the market at the moment. We're at about, I think, $5 per ton for RED Plus projects. And so really, how do we unlock that scale? Part of that is to have this increasing price. And part of that, of course, is to have the transparency needed to know how much supply is available on the market to get a better sense of, how much supply might be available and at what cost. So tracking this supply and demand growth is really fundamental to better understanding the market, and to try and provide transparency is something that we're really excited to see Ecosystem Marketplace do on a more sort of quarterly or more frequent basis instead of on a yearly basis. I can say personally at TNC, we have been talking to a number of major corporations who have set a really ambitious target, which is step one. Step two is now trying to figure out how exactly to meet that target. And there's not really a clear pathway on, which types of investments they should make, how best to invest in offsets that have the highest level of environmental integrity. It's a very confusing marketplace, and it's very opaque. And so having transparency is a key part to trying to shine a light into what works and also what doesn't work. And I think we just need to be really honest with ourselves about what is, and also more importantly, what is not working. I did want to briefly acknowledge that there are some new initiatives that are trying to address some of these questions. So the core carbon attributes feature of the task force is one of those. Another is the recently launched LEAF initiative, which is trying to provide sort of a centralized place for companies to engage with jurisdictional RED Plus. I'm excited to see all of these, but I think with everything in the voluntary market, time will tell. We need to actually see if it works, and we need that transparency to know how all of these are working. And so I just wanted to close with kind of one key point about the role of the voluntary carbon markets. So we currently have, I believe the latest estimates for that, we have about a 15 gigaton gap of ambition based on the current country targets with their NDCs for where we need to be by 2030. If Article 6 could be agreed, AIDA estimates that trading could reduce that gap by about 9 billion tons by 2030. If the voluntary carbon markets could do another 1 to 2 billion tons, that already gets us 2/3 of the way to being on track with a 1.5 degree world. So we really need all hands on deck at the moment. And to be most effective at this, we really do need top-notch data analytics and transparency in this market. So thank you again for letting me speak, and really excited to see what Ecosystem Marketplace is going to produce.
Thank you, Kelly. Amazing comments. We have some questions coming in on Q&A, but I'll hold off on pulling those in until Katerina, did you want to say anything else at this time?
No, I cannot agree more with Patrick and Kelly. I think all of the points mentioned are very powerful and important. I would just maybe add one more aspect, and it's a simple one. It's the point of convenience. Yeah. So transparent markets are also convenient for everyone to take part on those. And we see it on the compliance carbon markets. Price discovery is not hard, takes several seconds. Closing deals on the voluntary carbon market can take up to several weeks of negotiation between project developers and the buyers. It's a frustrating process for, I think, everyone involved. Since more and more companies are making net zero commitments, what we also see is that the purchasing departments are shifting from marketing departments to the financial departments. So really the transparency in terms of pricing and the market signals, volumes traded and issued and retired of credits are simply essential for the buyers to make their forecasting exercises, to start putting in place more sophisticated hedging strategies and simply mature the market. So if we're talking about the market, growing multiple fold times, it will simply not happen with whatever we have today. The transparency and liquidity will have to be much higher, and convenience and that's very kind of important aspect as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and to the points around transparency or information. So launching this week and starting with today is the new survey platform, in which we're really trying to make it dynamic and integrated with other types of data transparency mechanisms, such as exchanges, as those are emerging. We're tracking not just spot, but also forward activity, which then means we're also tracking deliveries now. So we're evolving, this survey from maybe a historical sort of limitation based on the market interest and of kind of the frequency of data and quality of data, and really trying to move the needle in terms of enabling frequency that could be daily. If an organization wants to respond, go back into their profile, add in new transactions or deliveries, they could do that on a daily basis if they wanted to. But we're just not hearing that yet from the market. We're hearing monthly is the most likely, frequent, pace. And we're understanding this, as we go, but roughly a third of our respondent base are saying they'll move to a monthly frequency. Another third will do quarterly, and then the remaining will be sort of a mix between annual and I don't know, or as transactions occur. So we're very much kind of looking forward to seeing, how with this new infrastructure, the market will respond. We definitely will be learning as we go. And so feedback, from respondents, is going to be critical. Kim's going to do a brief overview here. Before you do that, Kim, there's a couple of questions. I don't want them to be totally ignored. And I'm just trying to start at the top here of the screen. And I see some questions around sort of the preference between voluntary offsets and RECs. I thought maybe you, Kelly, or Katharina could respond to that. Mostly in terms of company preference and how they view offsets versus RECs.
I'm happy to take a stab. So I know historically when I was focused a little bit more on RECs than I am currently focused on, NCS at the Nature Conservancy. One of the reasons why we saw company preference for RECs was because they would get recognition in their CDP or other reporting with their scope 2 emissions. And so typically we would see a market company preference for RECs over offsets, but only for scope 2. So two things that I think would be interesting to kind of keep in mind about what that might mean. So one is that, historically there hasn't been so much guidance for buyers around when and how to use offsets, or there hasn't been any incentive for them to use it because a lot of reporting platforms don't really give you extra points for using it. So there's a number of initiatives at the moment that are trying to actually come up with guidance, which I think is really exciting and could really help the market and provide clarity. The other thing, which I know we're wrestling with a little bit at TNC, is this difference between scope 1 and scope 3 emissions, particularly in the land use sector. So there are a lot of agricultural, food and beverage companies that are trying to reduce their scope 3 emissions, who are interested in doing more direct investments in scope 3, but sometimes it's within a watershed instead of with specific, farmers. And so we're having a lot of internal discussions around this kind of nebulous concept of insetting and what actually quality insetting looks like. And I would say at the moment, there's not a whole lot of guidance out there. There's some with like SustainCert, which is, I think, a branch from Gold Standard. So there's beginning to be some space there, but I think it's a really nascent space and one that we're definitely keeping an eye on because we're really interested in trying to get some answers and some guidance on, how can companies best engage in something that's maybe not quite offsetting, but still has high, environmental integrity and verification and all of that for their scope 3 emissions.
Yeah, I agree on the perspective between offsets and RECs. I just want to say that from our experience, if a company is offsetting, they are most certainly also using RECs or guarantees of origin to offset their or compensate or cover their scope 2 emissions, right? So it's not one or the other. I have never seen a company using RECs to offset their scope 1. So it's just two different instruments used to compensate for a different source of emissions or scope of emissions.
Yeah, there's a much bigger conversation there about do the companies that are reporting use of RECs or offsets have the same definitions, and are they using these terms almost synonymously sometimes, which we do see. There's also a question, and then I'll get it to you, Kim, and come back to some more questions at the end. There's another question here about when did Europe overtake US as a leading buyer? And now we obviously can't guarantee that we have all of the buyers' information, and every time there's a reporting cycle or organizations are reporting. We last did this, I think it was 2017, we did a regional analysis, and at that time, the US was very much ahead as an individual country, not even bringing in Canada, Mexico over Europe in terms of offsets. And so I think, we kind of looked at that from a supply perspective. We also looked at that from a buyer's perspective. But we were sort of seeing this move clearly, as maybe more compliance-based approaches are sort of in limbo or waiting to be, to move forward, and where that leaves, a growing surge of ambition around net zero, which is, driven by emerged or developed economies, and how that will start to trickle. As I mentioned before, we're starting to see all of this also emerging in emerging economies. So we can follow up with more details there on that question. Kim, I'll pass this over to you, and then I'll try to get to these other questions, at the end. I know we don't have a whole lot of time left.
Great. Are you able to see my screen? Hello? Can anyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay,
looks
great.
good.
Great. Don't want to have any technical difficulties. So in light of the limitation on time, I'll just spend a few minutes showing what our new global carbon survey platform looks like. The carbon survey is really our bread and butter at Ecosystem Marketplace. It allows us to really draft up all these reports and provide all of these insights that are helping drive transparency in the market. So it was really important for us in the past several months to respond to these calls for more comprehensive information on carbon markets, as well as address the fact that our respondent numbers are rising every year, and we want to be able to provide a quick turnaround of information for them and enable ease of reporting. So, and our current survey is living within our Ecosystem Marketplace website under password protected login. So our respondents this year, there were over 1,000 organizations that we invited to respond to the survey. Many of them have already activated their respondent profiles. So today, during the survey launch, they'll be invited to log into this comprehensive survey where they'll be introduced to with the general background on the survey, the general context and intent behind the work we're doing, and incentives to respond, because we want to make sure that in addition to letting respondents know that they're driving transparency by providing data to us, they also get recognized for the great work that they're doing and help scaling voluntary markets. So we have a question to ensure that they are willing and able to be publicly recognized, as well as accepting our terms and conditions before jumping into the survey. The first major section of the survey is just trying to get a sense of, who this respondent is, what role they play in the market, and, what their level of expertise is in the market, how old they are, and trying to get a sense of what the trends in market actors are in the coming years. And from there, we've really built out the survey this year. We have many questions that we'll be asking respondents to try and get and dig deep into trends in the market. So to allow respondents to kind of pick and choose which sections they are able to complete, we have these introductory questions that kind of let them select the sections that they're trying to fill out in this session, whatever submission they're working on at the time. And as Stephen pointed out, there's a lot more flexibility. So we'll be collecting information on how often the respondent wants to fill out the survey or is able to, as well as if they'd be interested in connecting their transaction information to the survey through an API. This is a feature that's in development, but will hopefully be rolled out later this year. And lastly, in terms of reporting transaction data, we have an online option and an offline option. Just kind of depends on the respondent's comfortability. If the respondent selects to provide or to fill out the online platform, we also have a feature that lets them complete part of the transaction information by providing project IDs. Since we've been scraping data from the registries, we have a lot of project information. So if the respondent has a project ID, say CAR 621, they can automatically fill in some of the information that is asked for in the survey page. So things like project name, project type, project country are all automatically provided. And I see we're running a bit short on time, so I'll kind of skim through these, but there's a lot more in-depth questions that are going to be asked, and if the respondent's able to provide them, then they'll have an opportunity to do so, from offset buyer information to transaction information to project information. It covers a wide variety of attributes related to the transaction.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And I think you're right in terms of time. I mean, I think that we're actually going to be having two workshops for survey respondents to kind of learn more about this and, get some instruction. We'll be making some announcements about that today to that group. It is tailored and exclusively for survey respondents, so it's not a public, these are not public workshops, but if you're interested, contact us and we can make sure you're given an invite. There's quite a lot more there. I just want to maybe see if we can get back to one or two more of these questions, but kind of use them as a wrap up, for today's session. And I would go to maybe one question here, which is about the kind of the dynamics between compliance and voluntary markets. So there's a question here that says, would credit suppliers such as forest owners become more in favor of compliance market programs than voluntary programs, as compliance markets are continuing to influence voluntary markets? I think I'm understanding the question.
I can
go for it, Patrick.
Yeah, I don't know if it's visible. I started to write in response that I wasn't sure if we'd get back to any of these questions. And basically, I was saying, yes, particularly as these compliance and voluntary markets begin to merge. And I was pointing towards the example of Colombia, which has a compliance market in terms of a carbon tax, but they do allow offsets in the system, including offsets that are from previously called voluntary standards like gold standard and VCS. In this case, they're offsets that are being sold in the compliance system, so they're compliance offsets. But we see that the demand there for these offsets or credits are outstripping the supply. So in that case, the price of the offsets are rising up to that $5 compliance limit. So that's a clear example, specific example of where these markets are blurring, and that's directly affecting price. There's other examples as well. Kelly touched on the LEAF Coalition, which is about to pump $1 billion into jurisdictional red, and they're doing that through with trees, art trees, verified credits when those hit the market, and the deals will be struck by Emergent, and that whole system has a $10 floor price. So that's a lot of money that's going to be going into a minimum of $10 red credits, and that you would expect to spill over into the broader markets as even if it's a project and it's nested in a system, if they can start selling for $10, it's going to spill over into voluntary markets.
Thing I would just add to that is just that also we can see compliance markets influencing other compliance markets. So it's not just the dynamic between voluntary and compliance. So one example is the recently launched CORSIA carbon market for international aviation. I was doing a little bit of analysis, and basically at the current prices that we're seeing CORSIA trade at, which I think is about $1 per ton for eligible units, we probably won't see any CAR or ACR projects selling into CORSIA because they have a much more attractive price within the California market, which is at about $15 a ton. So it's important to also see how those are all linked in terms of offset supply and price as well.
But think we're maybe out of time. It doesn't. It looks like there's another. There's a keynote plenary going on next, so I don't want to keep people from that. But just to thank the panelists for coming here, for their support of ecosystem marketplace generally, and also, really just I think this moment is maybe difficult to have be as momentous feeling as it really is for us, because we can't be in person and celebrate and have a big kind of occasion about it. But this really is a big transition moment for ecosystem marketplace. We're really excited to see what type of data we can start to pull in from this new process, the new system, and also as we launch the new data dashboards and can start to bring the data to life a bit more, for users. That we just continue to think that this is kind of going to be an exciting year for us as a collective group in the voluntary market. So thank you, Katharina. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Kim, Patrick, and everybody for attending. Thank you to Car, and wish you all a great rest of your day. And don't forget to respond to the EM Carbon Survey.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Bye now.
Thank you. Goodbye.